Hi everyone. I know by now you're probably starting to write your papers, or at least you've thought up a structure or a series of texts that you want to deal with, maybe made an outline, and some of you may have gotten even farther than that. And I just wanted to go over some general writing guidelines that I usually teach in face-to-face classes, and I thought I could go over them here to help you through this process. I know that paper writing can cause a degree of anxiety, and I hope to demystify the process somewhat because sometimes your big picture thinking causes you to lose some of the small details. And so, hopefully, by just kind of going over some of those details and some of the structures that really make strong papers strong, that you'll have this information at your fingertips for the paper as you write it. And I will save this in the course content as a PDF file, so you don't feel like you need to read every single word, as I'm going to be rushing through some things. So one of the things that you should definitely start working on is writing solid paragraphs. And this is something that in your group projects you all did a good job of. Paragraphs need to be at least 6 sentences long. They need to be no longer than 11 sentences. I don't want to see papers that have just chops of information, that are in these small chunks that aren't very organized. And I also don't want to see a paragraph go on for 2 pages. And trust me, I've seen that in published books. And paragraphs need to have a structure to them as well. You need to have an introduction sentence that leads into the body of your paragraph and end it with a solid conclusion for the paragraph. The paragraph needs a discernible order. And I don't write this last point to scare you, but just to say to really think about your paper and the argumentative paragraphs you're writing as the backbone of your paper, because short paragraphs do really mark a C paper. I want to see organized paragraphs. This is a 300 level class, and I do think that that's something you should definitely be aspiring to. So one way to think of structuring paragraphs that I usually like to teach is in terms of claims, evidence, and analysis. This is a backbone of a paragraph. It's also kind of the backbone of your paper. You may have heard before the motto, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. That's kind of what happens here, although it's a little different. What you can see is that the first sentence is a claim that kickstarts the paragraph. It gets the paragraph rolling by making a point that the rest of the paragraph can back up. So this sentence, while Hal's soldiers are depicted as being both battle-ready and full of energy, other parts of Vernon's speech manage to create an unlikely image of beauty in the troops as well. And I'm not going to go over the rest of this, but do notice that what immediately follows the claim are lots of quotes, and the analysis of these quotes in the middle of the paragraph. And then now at the end, you see that there's some analysis overall of why this is so significant. The unlikely beauty that Vernon found upon viewing the troops may come from the fact that they presented to him the most ideal image possible of a contingent of soldiers. And so as you see, as you keep reading, this analysis really does show why this paragraph has a point, why it's important to point out these various words and phrases. And then here's another example that I'm not going to go over. It's not really for a literature paper, but you can also see how this one works with that structure as well. And you can look over this on the PDF. So you must introduce quotes. Here's an example of 2 sentences that doesn't do this. On the other hand, I think increasing the amount of soldiers in the Middle East would be beneficial to the United States. And then the quote comes in directly after that and does not have a he said, she said, or anything like that. The second sentence must be introduced. Someone has to say it. You can't just have a quote stand alone, even if you might have referred to the author in the last sentence. There needs to be something in the sentence that introduces the quote. So introduction paragraphs are another key thing, and these are some general pointers. Don't give a whole lot of context. Don't quote the Norton. Don't give a lot of biographical background. And don't talk about how amazing the author is. These are things that you would do in a 10,000 word paper. You're writing a 1,000 word paper, and so you don't have a lot of time to spend on that. I don't want you to tell me how brilliant the writers are in this introduction paragraph. I want you to really work through what your topic is and what your thesis is and introduce those texts rather than spend a lot of time waxing eloquently about the authors. So, in the introduction, avoid making generalizations about the time period. Get to the point as quickly as possible. Here's an example of a weak introduction. Though William Shakespeare died 400 years ago, his work still lives on today and will last until the end of time. Okay, you haven't really told me anything that everybody doesn't already agree with. During the Renaissance, he was a very important writer. Now you're basically being so basic that you're simplifying to a grand degree. So avoid that. Avoid this kind of introduction. Just start getting into your point. Here's another one that's a problem. I'm not going to go over all of this, but it spends a lot of time talking about beauty, and it does it actually in a very well-written, poetic way. However, it takes a while to get to any kind of point. And really, we need to get to the point of the paper sooner. So I know that you're all probably good writers, but I do want you to think of this more in terms of the introduction is a place to establish your argument. So here's one that works. This is from a paper that was written for me on an 18th century subject. In order to successfully engage the world, we must become involved even beyond a level that we feel comfortable. So that's a pretty good start because it at least sets up kind of a topic, a general idea. Next, when we participate in political arguments, we help to shape the society that we live in and learn more about its inner workings. Now, if it were to keep going here and keep on talking very generally about political arguments, engaging the world, that probably wouldn't work. But look what happens next. Immediately, an author is introduced and a subject. And at Spectator number 1, however, Joseph Addison advises the opposite. Rather than become an agent for change, Addison claims, thus I live in the world, rather than as a spectator of mankind than as one of the species, by which means I have made myself a speculative statesman, soldier, merchant, and artisan, without ever meddling with any practical part in life. So there's a quote, and as you're doing, you're picking a quote that you're going to carry over into other texts and show how different writers engage with an idea. So this immediately talks about how this idea is significant. A constant struggle can be found throughout the literature of the 18th century about whether to withdraw from society or become passionate about its progress. And now these next sentences work as a two-sentence thesis. In this paper, I will consider challenges to Addison's decision to watch rather than act from two 18th century texts. While Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard Almanac argues for the pursuit of individual happiness and self-improvement, Samuel Johnson's Rasselas suggests that a life of contemplation and self-knowledge can only go so far, and that we must become active pursuers of change. So that works because it immediately says, okay, these are the texts I'm going to be dealing with. Here's the quote that I'm going to be using to go through this, and it does it in a very succinct way. And building off of that, avoid superlatives. Here are examples of superlative adjectives. Interesting, brilliant, wonderful, excellent, fascinating. These words tell rather than show. You've probably heard that before. You want to show, don't tell. By saying something is interesting, you don't elucidate or explain why it's interesting. Avoid short paragraphs, which I've already gone over. Sorry, that's repetitive. You must introduce quotes. Again, repetitive. I should have edited this better. Okay, so don't just summarize the plot. Use the specific language to make your point. I don't want to know that you understand the plot. I want to know that you're wrestling with the ideas. Quote frequently. Don't feel like you need to summarize the plot in order to make a specific point in the text. Limit summary to 1, maybe 2 sentences per text. So really the key to this is that you need to quote and quote a lot. This is a crucial guideline. If you're going too long without quoting, you should probably rewrite, and you should probably put an emphasis on the specific language. This is something I think I pointed out in some of the group projects, and definitely something that I'm going to be looking for in your papers. A few other things, I'm going to go over these quickly. Don't use contractions like don't or won't, as I've done there. Do not or will not instead. You're going for a more formal writing. Quote correctly. Look over the sample format sheet that I've posted and also the earlier slide. Use solid transitions between paragraphs, between sentences. Make sure the paper flows well. Avoid conversational language. This isn't the place for that. This is a more formal paper. Avoid passive voice. If that's something you're struggling with, I'd suggest you do a Google search for passive voice problems. And don't use semicolons or parentheses except for parenthetical citations. Most of the time when I see students use these, it's to mask a run-on sentence. If you know you're using the semicolon correctly, go for it. But a lot of times semicolons are used haphazardly. Most of my students laugh when they hear me say this or remind them this because they think I'm fighting a war against semicolons. So look over the documents on paper writing that I've posted, the paper writing tips, the conclusion tips, the sample format, and really, please don't hesitate to private message me if you'd like to discuss the paper over chat. So I've posted these things in the course content for you to look at, and I do encourage you to use that. One thing I always suggest students to do is take the writing guidelines, in which I suggest words that you shouldn't use, in which I also suggest some general overall formal stuff, and put that up on a bulletin board where you're writing, and just use that as you finish the paper. It's not something you need to be stressing about as you're dealing with the content. And this is just a class business kind of thing, but make sure you submit it to the assignment folder as either a doc, docx, or RTF file. Do not just copy and paste the text. It needs to be formatted in some form. If you're using something like Microsoft Works, you can save it in one of these other forms. And also, if you're using a Mac program or an open source program, usually RTF is the universal guideline, so I will take any of those. And make sure you follow the sample format sheet there. So that's really it. Happy writing. I really do want to help you, so please let me know if we can go to the chat room and talk over these things. I'm glad to do a group chat as well and then post the transcript for other people who might have issues. And I'm also happy to read over parts of your paper. And so one thing that I'm going to reward you with here, if you've actually watched the presentation, is to tell you that I am going to bump ahead the due date to Tuesday. So it's not due this Sunday, it's due Tuesday, which is a week from today. Some of you will probably be seeing this on Wednesday or Thursday. So I don't have the exact date in front of me, but it'll be the Tuesday of next week. And you should still go ahead and start reading Shakespeare, even if you are going to turn it in late. But I want to give you some extra time. I do feel like you've had a lot of reading last week, and I hope you'll take advantage of that. That's it. Happy writing.